Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and this is your year ahead horoscope and astrology forecast for the zodiac sign of Pisces for the entire year of 2024. All right, so let's jump right into it, Pisces. So here are your major keywords for the year: finances, self, communication, home, family, work, health, children, enemies, and mental health. So those are some of the main themes this year that I want to talk about. I'm going to spend the rest of this forecast expanding on some of those topics and the transits associated with them. All right, so here's the planetary movements calendar. I want to start off first by talking about the eclipses that are happening in Aries and Libra, which are happening in your second house of finances and your eighth house of shared resources and other people's money. So eclipses represent major beginnings and major endings in these areas of your life. So it represents the end of one chapter when it comes to your finances and the beginning of a new chapter. So sometimes there can be very pivotal events that take place at this time, which change our relationship towards money and finances and financial resources in general. So some of this has to do with your own personal finances, which is the second house, and some of it has to do with shared resources, which is the eighth house, and that can relate to things like your partner's finances if you're in a long-term relationship, that maybe there's some major changes when it comes to their finances, either going upwards or downwards, that affects you somehow personally in a direct way. In other instances, the eighth house can represent debt, taxes, as well as things like inheritances and mortality. So in some way, these topics come up for you in a significant way that ends up affecting your personal finances. And this is part of an ongoing story or ongoing process that actually started last year in 2023 when the eclipses first started happening in this axis in your chart. But we'll see a continuation of it this year with some important events taking place, especially around the March-April timeframe when the first set of eclipses takes place, and then again in October when the next eclipse takes place in Libra. So that's the first major area or topic this year. The next one that I wanted to talk about is that we have the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is coming up, and it's going to get very close to going exact in your first house in Pisces this year. So the first house represents your sense of self and who you are in the world and how you appear or how you show up to others. The first house also represents the mind as well as the body. So my primary keyword for this transit, because it's Saturn conjunct Neptune, is nebulous challenges involving the self, the mind, and the body. So already Pisces or Neptune has been going through Pisces for the past several years, which is bringing some nebulousness, some floatiness, and a little bit of idealism to your outlook on life. But recently, starting last year in March of 2023, Saturn actually went into Pisces, which is bringing a much more heavy, much more realistic, or a much more sense of realism into the picture. And sometimes Saturn can bring with it some challenges or some surmountable difficulties, where either Saturn will shut down one avenue in which you've been proceeding up to this point and just say that you cannot proceed further in what you're doing. Or in other instances, it just presents a roadblock where something comes up that's an obstacle, but through much striving and work and effort on your part, you're able to overcome it and become stronger as a result. So for you, because it's happening in your first house, some of these challenges probably pertain to your body in some sense. So sometimes this can indicate a period where our physical vitality is a little bit lower than usual, or in which we're encountering more health issues or different types of ailments that make us feel slower or make us feel like we're aging much more rapidly than at other times in our life. This can also apply to our mental state, so that we feel more slow or we feel a little bit more depressed, or a little bit more sort of dark and glooming than at other periods in our life. And the problem with Neptune being involved is that sometimes it can make it so that the solution to this is a little bit hard to grasp, and it's a little bit hard to pin down. So that's something that's going to peak especially around the June or July time frame when the Saturn-Neptune conjunction gets really close. But then we're going to see some added emphasis and major developments in this area around September when an eclipse happens in Pisces, which is going to represent a new beginning and a major chapter of your life starting with respect to your sense of self and what you need to do in order to take care of yourself. So this is important because it's going to open up and lead into an eclipse series next year in 2025 that's going to start bouncing back and forth between your 7th house of relationships and your 1st house of self. And you're going to need to put more emphasis at different points on yourself versus your relationships, but eventually try to seek balance between those two. But at least for this year, for 2024, I think the emphasis is going to be more on self and just needing to take care of yourself and do the things that are restful and healing for you in order to support both your body as well as your mind. All right, so that is that transit. I wanted to mention also some really positive transits that are coming up this year. The first one is the Jupiter transit through your 3rd house, where Jupiter is eventually going to meet up and conjoin with Uranus in Taurus in your 3rd house. And my primary keyword for this is unexpected opportunities with respect to communication, relatives, but also potentially your neighbors or your neighborhood and your local environment. So the 3rd house represents how we speak and communicate to the world. And during this time, especially during the first half of the year, this could be a good period for opening up different ways to communicate and different avenues of communicating and expressing your inner thoughts and your inner ideas about the world. So for some people, this can be like taking up a new communication medium in order to get your message out into the world. For other people, it could be things like learning a different language so that you learn how to communicate differently. But the vibe of this is just, especially in the April timeframe, taking advantage of any unexpected opportunities for growth in this area, because if you do, then you could find yourself becoming much more successful as a communicator and it bringing much more positive things into your life than at other times like earlier than this before. The 3rd house is also siblings, so there could be some good events going on with your siblings or with respect to your relationship with them. It also represents extended relatives as well as neighbors, and there could be some positive opportunities in terms of your immediate environment that you should take advantage of because they could be quite beneficial. All right, so that's one of the most positive transits of this year. The other really positive transit is that starting in June, Jupiter is going to move into your 4th house of home and family. So this represents a period of growth and expansion with respect to your home and family and parents. So in terms of the home, it just indicates that in the second half of the year, you're going to go into a period where things are going much better at home. For some people, you might move into a new home or a new house, which represents an upgrade compared to what you had before. In other instances, if you're already settled, you may decide to change things at home or do some home improvement or some things that are just meant to improve your private life in order to make it more supportive and more helpful for you in your home environment. The 4th house also represents parents, so there may be some positive events happening in the lives of your parents or some positive things that happen in terms of your interaction and your relationship with your parents that ends up being quite beneficial. I would say that this would be especially the case around the June time frame when not just Jupiter, but several other planets move into Gemini all at the same time. It looks like a pretty good time. And then the Jupiter transit itself that I was just talking about will last for the entire second half of 2024. So that's why it's one of the most positive transits of the year. All right. Other things, moving on to other transits, there's going to be a Mars retrograde in the last few months of the year, and this is going to be taking place in your 5th house and your 4th house. So my primary keyword for this is tensions around work, health, children, and sexuality. So sorry, actually I circled the wrong one. It's taking place in your sixth house and your fifth house, and that's why I wrote work, health, children, and sexuality. So the sixth house has to do with work and health, and the fifth house has to do with children, leisurely activities, but also sex and sexuality. So Mars transits can tend to bring a little bit of conflict into the area of our life that they're transiting through. For you, with Mars going through your sixth house, there could be some challenges or some conflicts at work, or conflicts with people who work for you, or assistants if you find yourself in a managerial position. The sixth house can also represent health. So sometimes there can be irritating or heating type ailments that happen at this time, so that in some forms of like Ayurvedic medicine or other things like that, they'll try to counteract it by doing things that are more cooling, because you'll find yourself getting a little bit more angry or a little bit more hot-headed, and sometimes this can cause you to be a little bit more impulsive, and part of the advice for that is to be a little bit more careful, or a little bit more reserved, or conservative in your actions, because you don't want to do anything impetuousness or impulsive that puts you in a situation where you could have an accident or an injury, for example. The other part of this transit is Mars is going retrograde in your fifth house. If you have children, sometimes this can indicate like a period of more irritability or conflict with children than at other times in your life. This can also indicate a period in which, in terms of sex and sexuality, there can be a little bit more conflict surrounding this area as well, or a little bit more irritation. So perhaps you or like a romantic partner are more irritable, or can in a heated moment like say something hurtful, and it can lead to a much more major like fight or blow up than maybe was intended at first. So as with all Mars transits, the advice is just to exercise caution and restraint, especially so that you don't do anything or say anything that leads to a more significant or long-term instance of severing or separation than maybe you intended, or maybe than you would want at first. Although certainly with Mars transits, the advice is always that if there needs to be a conflict, because sometimes there are conflicts that have to happen or have to arise at this time, to just go into it knowing that something that seems small or more limited could become a bigger issue. So to sort of pick your battles wisely, I guess, is the main piece of advice for that transit. All right, so that's the Mars retrograde happening, especially the last couple of months of the year. The final transit I want to mention is just that Pluto is departing from your 11th house of friends, and it's moving into your 12th house. And the 12th house represents fundamentally a couple of things. One of them is, if the 11th house represents friends, then the 12th house represents people that we don't get along with very well, or sometimes people that are outright enemies, or people that undermine us in some way. So that's one topic for the 12th house. And Pluto itself represents deeply transformative experiences. So this is indicating a period where you're going to have some deeply transformative experiences involving people that you don't get along with very well in your life. Sometimes this can raise issues of like control or manipulation, and the need to push back against those things if you find them happening, or you find somebody's trying to undermine you through those methods. In other instances, the 12th house can also represent mental health and just taking care of ourselves. And sometimes a good manifestation of this transit can be starting to see a therapist and starting to go into therapy in order to do a sort of like deep dive, in order to better understand some of the ways in which maybe in some instances we can be undermining ourselves or undermining our own actions without realizing it. But if you do that, and you do that type of work where you sort of like dive deep and look inside yourself, you can emerge sometimes as a much different person, and as a much more effective person in the world, by having done that internal work and working on your mental health. So ultimately, I think that's going to be a positive transit, and it's going to be a long-term process because it's a longer transit, but it's good to pay attention to any changes that start happening in 2024 with respect to that, because it could be a preview of some more longer-term transits that will be playing out in the future. All right, so I think that's actually it in terms of transits that I wanted to mention for 2024. So here's all of the major alignments that I was talking about this year. Here's a quick slide for those watching the video version, which shows some dates of some of those transits to pay attention to. Here is a graphic for the Mars retrograde transit that I mentioned in the last few months of the year. But otherwise, I think that's it for this horoscope and for this report about 2024. So for a more detailed breakdown of the transits this year, check out my 2024 year ahead astrology forecast on YouTube. Or if you're looking for good dates to do things next year, I actually just released my 2024 Electional astrology report, where I went and looked at all of the fortunate dates next year and outlined over the next 12 months when the most lucky dates are to do different types of things. So that report's currently, I'm doing a 15% off sale for New Year's, and you can find out more information at theastrologypodcast.com/2024 report. All right, I think that's it, Pisces, for this horoscope for this year. So good luck in 2024, and I'll see you again next year. All right, bye. If you appreciate the work I'm doing here on the podcast and you'd like to find a way to support it, then consider becoming a patron through my page on patreon.com. In exchange, you'll get access to some great subscriber benefits. You can find out more information at patreon.com/astrologypodcast. Shout out to our sponsor for this episode, which is the Chani app, the #1 astrology app for self-discovery, mindfulness, and healing. You can download it on the Apple App Store or on Google Play, or for more information, visit app.chani.com. Special thanks to all the patrons that helped to support the production of this episode of the podcast through our page on patreon.com. In particular, shout out to the patrons on our producers tier, including patrons Christy Moe, Ariana Amour, Mandy Ray, Angelique Nambo, Issa Sabah, Jake Otero, Jeannie Marie Kaplan, and Melissa Delano. If you're looking for a reliable astrologer to get an astrological consultation with, then we have a new list of astrologers on the podcast website that we recommend for readings. Find out more information at theastrologypodcast.com/consultations. The astrology software that we use and recommend here on the podcast is called SolarFire for Windows, which is available for the PC at alabe.com. Use the promo code AP15 to get a 15% discount. For Mac users, we recommend a software program called AstroGold for Mac OS. You can find out more information at astrogold.io, and you can use the promo code AstroPodcast15 to get a 15% discount. If you're really looking to expand your studies of astrology, then I would recommend my Hellenistic Astrology course, which is an online course on ancient astrology, where I take people through basic concepts up through intermediate and advanced techniques for reading birth charts. You can find out more information at courses.theastrologyschool.com. And finally, thanks to our sponsors, including the Mountain Astrologer magazine, which is a quarterly astrology magazine, which you can read in print or online at mountainastrologer.com. And the Northwest Astrological Conference, which is happening both in person and online, May 23rd through the 27th, 2024. You can find out more information at norwac.net.